or the Scottish Event Campus. And I'm just going to take a little stroll around and kind of go the opposite direction of yesterday's stream, which was very focused on the numbers and money and equity, and just talk about kind of childhood. So this is Glasgow. This is the city I was born in, and I think almost all of these buildings, I've been looking into it, were built during my lifetime. So they began the SEC, or the Scottish Event Campus, in 1985, and they began building all these different buildings. And you've got the OVO Event Centre, you've got the Armadillo, which is a classic bit of design in Glasgow, and you've got the Science kind of museum over here, and then one of these curved bridges. And you'll see that already I've managed to introduce a number into your brain, 1985. And so that brings me to the thing I wanted to talk about, which is this idea of having a day with no numbers. So I've been joking with friends that I think childhood ends when SAT scores begin, or to be more technical, I think there's a real link between infancy and innumeracy, or a lack of understanding of numbers. So I mean, for the entirety of the time that I lived in this city, I was, a child without any real understanding of what numbers were, what time was, what dates were, what money was, what debts were, what interest rates were, what any of these numbers were. And it gave me just an enormous amount of peace, like absolutely biblical amount of peace. And I think that changes as you become a child. Suddenly you get scores applied, you become more conscious of a schedule and being late or being on time. You become a lot more tense around these topics. And what I find myself doing at the moment is trying to return to a state of enjoyment and kind of presence that I would say is linked to not worrying about numbers. So I've spent the vast majority of my life being very obsessed with the lack of numbers I had, either in sporting performance, financial performance, in business, on Twitter, on social media, on Instagram, all these things. And I just kind of wanted to pause and say, what would it be like just to have a single day where you didn't read or think about numbers? So imagine waking up and there's no clock. Imagine going to your calendar and there's no dates. Imagine getting on the road and there's no speed limits. Imagine parking your car and there's no parking kind of restricted times. Imagine just wandering around a city and seeing no kind of numerical information whatsoever. Imagine checking your phone and there's no notification badges. Imagine looking up to the top of your phone and there's no time. Imagine even just a day where you are not focused on all the numbers that you do or do not have. Imagine checking, just paying for things and not knowing about the price. Imagine wandering through the streets of kind of any city that you love and kind of accumulating objects without thinking about whether you can afford them. Imagine just even this clock in the distance, right? This clock is now forming an abstraction of time in my head. And already, even as I try to avoid thinking about it, my mind is drawn to the fact that 12 people are watching this. So you can see how quickly just the simple challenge of spending one day without thinking about numbers can get thwarted. There are so many systems and so many parts of the human experience and the adult experience that are defined by the numbers. So how many people are watching this stream is something that a streamer will worry about. How much money can I bring in the next year to pay for my family? This is something that every kind of man who tries to put food on the table will be worrying about. And it's quite right that we worry about these numbers, but I don't think that's how humans developed, or how we grew up, or how we kind of created ourselves as a society. And I think this is really, really important. Just look at these magnificent buildings. So you've got the BBC here, Britain, and over here you've got these fantastic science buildings. And so if you go camping and you don't take your phone, I think you are in the region of what I'm talking about. You are likely to spend a day with the fire where you wake up and maybe there's a bit of rain on the tent. You don't check your phone because you don't have it. You start a fire and warm some water for your coffee. You go walk among the stream and the trees. You pay attention to where the light is in the sky. You become much more curious about the kind of fading colours from dawn to dusk, the change in how nature approaches you. You think about times, not when I'm going to eat and how many calories, but how do I feel and what can I hunt and what berries can I pick and what kind of meals can I prepare with the tools that I have on the camp. And your whole day becomes driven not by numbers or a schedule or time or what I should be doing when or how many calories or how many steps should I get in or who should I be kind of speaking to or what notification should I respond to. But the very primal urges of dawn waking you up, dusk putting you to sleep, hunger kind of precipitating some form of meal, the cold precipitating the lighting of a fire, and you become kind of responsive to inputs instead of responsive to schedules and responsive to numerical hallucinations. I just love these buildings. So this is the Glasgow Science Centre over here. Absolutely stunning. What an amazing development. Again, one of these Millennium buildings that was funded and developed in the early days. And so I think what I'm going to try and do is create this environment for a few friends. I think we're going to try and maybe make a room that has no numbers anywhere, and maybe a version of some software that has no numbers. So I'm starting with a music player as a little prototype, and I've been doing a design for that. But if I ask you what your favorite song is or your favorite mix, you won't be thinking, oh, I really care about how long it is. I just don't think that'll be true. And if I was to focus on how you feel about money, it's always going to be a negative feeling towards a negative balance. Yeah, there we go. I just had somebody say no numbers except revenue, and like that may be because I often tease people about the lack of revenue, but that's just to get them off it. I'm not saying that numbers are important. I want to be really clear. I'm just expressing how hard it might be should you want a single day without numbers, and that maybe just one day off a year. Just start like that. Just think, can I take one day off a year from numbers? Not to say that we aren't going to be back in the mix, trying to make our businesses work, trying to make everything work, trying to respond, trying to be on social, trying to build up network, trying to connect. And that all those numbers that apply to all those things are important, but that numbers are a construct that we've come up with. And just by asking you to try and drop them for a day, I think it brings attention to how central they are to your thinking. Look at this, it's just, oh, that colour. There we go, that's a backdrop. Look at that. Every now and then you just find a backdrop and you just think, right, the yellows are good. There we go. And I'm sharing all this because I've put myself just through so much mental anguish over stuff that, it's essentially just a bunch of numbers rattling around my head and didn't actually end up hurting me whatsoever. But I worried about it ever so much. And when I stopped worrying about the numbers and started kind of focusing on the feelings, that is, does somebody really love working with me or not? Is somebody going to betray me or not? Can I trust somebody or not? Like, those are the kind of central questions to long-term business. And I stopped kind of thinking, we're open from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m, by the way. And I stopped thinking all about like how much money might I make out of this deal? What percentage do I own? What are the ways that this could financially ruin me? My thinking was just way clearer. and the numbers followed. That was the important thing, is that when I started with the feelings, the numbers would always follow. When I started with the numbers, things always felt bad. And that's been a huge realization. And I think I'm going to try and see if I can coach friends on this, or at the very least, not necessarily coach, because that term has a lot of kind of scammy connotations now with a number of online coaches, but help some of my more creative friends see that driving the business plan into the heart of their creative dreams might not be the best idea. And if that's true, maybe it'll help them. I mean, I could be totally wrong here. I could be like, just off the deep end, spent way too much time thinking about my thinking. And, in fact, everybody needs numbers and we're fine. But my sense is that numbers are this enormous source of tension in everybody's brain on a daily basis. And that if you could just relax your grip of them for a single waking day, 16 hours, that you might just feel a little line in the sand mentally, a little kind of brain break has been had. And that would be really good for you. So this kind of concept of returning to a numeracy. In Shakespeare, there's this guy Caliban in I think it's Twelfth Night on the island, and he laments that he has learnt English because he can't unthink English. And he used to just kind of see the sky and the stars and the trees and grass all as one, and water flowed and nature was a kind of a single thing. But then humans taught him language. And that kind of ruined his perception of reality, because suddenly he started dividing everything. He divided the grass from the trees. He divided the sky from the earth, and he divided the water from the stream. Whereas before he used to kind of absorb nature as one. And I do think there's a real central point there, and this has been put out by a lot of other philosophers and students of the mind, particularly around the left brain and the right brain. I think this guy Ian McGill, who's got very popular on YouTube recently, talk about the difference between the left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere, and that the left is so logical and focused and numerical and acquisitive and active, and the right is kind of this numinous connection system that is more kind of aware of the things that are emotional and creative and explorative and connective. And he kind of makes the argument that the whole of society oscillates between focusing too much on the left brain and too much on the right brain, and that we've got way too far down the left brain side of the system by accounting for everything and going into the atoms of everything without really understanding myth and narrative and story and connections. So I think there's a bunch of themes here, and I'm really just poking at a kind of a single thought, which is helping people consider what they can let go of, and consider if they can kind of relax their brain through different dimensions. Like that, this process for me has taken, 20 years of just so much tension around trying to sort out the numbers in my life, and then finding out that the numbers were not the problem, the thinking was the problem, and then trying to relax my brain in different ways and finding some massive sources of peace. Good morning.
Morning.
There's people getting after it. Absolutely beautiful. There we go. So yeah. Anyway, that's just a bunch of caffeinated ramblings and explorations. But this is something I'm going to try and test out, both from a design perspective and from a kind of gathering perspective. And if you found any of this interesting, always feel free to comment, and love to chat about it. And yeah, there we go.